Penguin Random House Audio presents American Radicals: How 19th-Century Protest Shaped the Nation by Holly Jackson. Read for you by January Lavoy. For Sari Edelstein. Introduction. A second and more glorious revolution. On July 4th, 1826, Americans woke before dawn. Some squeezed into blue coats that had been folded in trunks for decades and covered what was left of their hair with tri-cornered hats, long out of fashion. At sunrise, cannons boomed, church bells pealed, and across the nation's scattered villages and modest cities, aged heroes of '76 fired salutes from flintlock muskets, marching down dirt thoroughfares to drum and fife and the cheers of the crowd. Most parades then proceeded to a grove or a town square for a reading of the Declaration of Independence, followed by high-flown speeches honoring this momentous day. The semi-centennial, or Jubilee, as they called it. Some addresses spun wild visions in which the 24 states, dotted with family farms and the vast forested territories beyond, would one day become a powerful empire. The listeners adjourned to eat barbecue and then headed to the taverns for rounds of toasts, to George Washington, to the flag, to the eagle, to the first half-century of American life. As orators waxed poetic on the imperishable names of the founders, who had risked execution as traitors to the crown in order to bequeath the everlasting legacy of freedom, Thomas Jefferson died in his bed in Virginia. Hours later, sitting in a chair at home in Massachusetts, John Adams followed him. It was exactly 50 years after the declaration they had drafted together was approved, founding the United States of America. Many regarded this strange historical coincidence as a divine message, God's seal of approval on the American Revolution, and a promise of perpetuity for its outcomes. Unmistakably, it was the threshold of a new era, the end of the beginning. The young nation had outlived the men who made it. What was next? One man in Indiana claimed to know. Robert Owen was a rich industrialist, renowned in this country and in Europe for running philanthropic experiments in a cotton mill he owned in New Lanark, Scotland. As the nation celebrated its jubilee, he mounted the stage at New Harmony Hall, a former church that he had purchased, along with the 20,000 acres surrounding it. Intrigued by communal groups like the Shakers, and emboldened by his experience applying his social theories to the factory workers he employed, Owen had sailed for the United States to propose a project on a far grander scale. His fame had spread after he addressed the assembled leaders of the federal government the previous year in Washington, D.C., pitching a wholesale reorganization of American life that was surprisingly well received. It was pouring rain on the Wabash River that 4th of July, but 1,000 people packed the building, traveling to this rural outpost from all over the country to hear what this slight Welsh gentleman had to say. While orators in other cities and towns sang the praises of the American founders, Owen focused instead on the limits of their achievement. They had been forced to settle for mere political independence, he claimed, hemmed in by the old-world prejudices that still dominated their era. But they could glimpse a stronger and clearer light at the distance, he explained, and the founders trusted that their descendants would pick up where they left off, completing the transformation they had only begun. Indeed, a second revolution was required, a new battle for freedom, superior in benefit and importance to the first revolution. He asked the crowd, "Are you prepared to imitate the example of your ancestors? Are you willing to run the risks they encountered? Are you ready, like them, to meet the prejudices of past times and determined to overcome them at all hazards for the benefit of your country and for the emancipation of the human race?" To launch this revolution, Owen presented his Declaration of Mental Independence to supplant the founding document adopted 50 years before that day. Its object was to slay a hydra of evils, enslaving mankind the world over, specifically the threefold horrid monster of private property, religion, and marriage. From our vantage point, almost 200 years later, Owen's social revolution seems destined to fail, his interpretation of the founders as heralds of secular communism laughable at best. Capitalism, evangelical Protestantism, and the nuclear family would ultimately win the day, becoming far more deeply entrenched in American culture during Owen's lifetime. But from where he stood, the future of the United States was wide open, rolling out like a screen on which marvelous utopian visions could be projected. And indeed, Indiana looked a little like Eden in 1826. The woodland areas around New Harmony abounded that summer with persimmons, wild grapes, and flowering vines, punctuated with flashes of tropical green and yellow from wheeling Carolina parakeets, which are now extinct. Fertile land was practically endless, offering the rapidly multiplying population the natural plenitude of timber forests and lakes and rivers teeming with fish. European visitors like Owen were astounded by the simple, direct dealings of the people carrying out the experiment that was early America. Their free and easy manners, the extreme equality across classes, and their universal, near-fanatical engagement in politics as a form of social engineering. They seized every local election or civic debate as a new opportunity to invent the country of the future. Railroads and the telegraph would soon join steamships and canals in the network of new technology connecting the expanding country for trade, the exchange of ideas, the development of new towns, new states, new industries. This restless mobility and ambition turned away from the past, pushing further into the vast and magnificent West. The booming agriculture of the South fed the beginning of the Industrial Revolution in the North, where new systems of integrated manufacturing processed these abundant raw materials for global commerce, auguring the great wealth that would one day drive a great nation. Viewed in another light, of course, this scene was not so utopian. The workers in these new factories might labor 16 hours a day, 6 days a week. Married women were relegated to the status of dependent children, unable to control property, vote, attend college, or sue in a court of law. The land, of course, was far from vacant. It was inhabited by long-established nations battling against extermination at the hands of white settlers. And the economic dynamo driving the young nation to prominence on the world stage was the forced labor of 1.5 million people of African descent enslaved in this land of radical freedom, a number that would more than double in the coming decades. The conditions under which they lived were unspeakably brutal, and American law unambiguously doomed their children and their children's children to the same outrages. Owen was right. A hydra of evils threatened the most profound ideals of the American project, and the recently departed founding generation would not be the ones to slay it. As his overflow audience suggests, many were ready to take up the mantle of a social revolution to right the many wrongs created or left unaddressed by the political revolution of their grandfathers. In the next half a century, hundreds of thousands of Americans pledged themselves to a vision of the nation based on collectivity, equality, and freedom. In social movements overlapping and diverging, they built a tradition of radical resistance that would reshape American life. Protest movements influenced westward expansion, Southern secession, Northern victory, and Reconstruction. They changed American law right up to the Constitution and transformed innumerable aspects of American culture, the breakfast table, the marital bed, and the church pew among them. Carrying the fight from the urban centers of the eastern seaboard to Kansas, Ontario, Haiti, Tennessee, Nigeria, and elsewhere, they extended their legacy through centuries and across the globe. This is the story of one constellation of these agitators and the second revolution they effected, though incompletely and imperfectly, in the most turbulent era of our history. The figures who come to the fore in this story worked across 3 entwined fields: slavery and race, sex and gender, property and labor. Each of these areas opened into other concerns: prisons, housing, birth control, religious belief, free speech, imperialism, child-rearing, and diet among them. Drawn into one flashpoint issue, they would soon find that it was inextricable from other oppressive systems. Owen's figure of the hydra of social evils was apt: one deadly organism with many faces. As Wendell Phillips reflected after 30 years agitating for abolition, universal suffrage, and labor rights, he had been a...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?